Bombings are often difficult to solve, since the perpetrator usually has left the scene, and the evidence goes up in smoke. But there are clues if investigators know what to look for. In this case, a tiny piece of plastic the size of a grain of sand would hold the key to a man's murder. At one time, the Bethlehem Steel Mill in Sparrows Point, Maryland, was the world's largest steel-making plant. More than 30,000 employees produced an incredible 15 tons of steel per minute. 45-year-old Nathan Allen worked at the mill to support his 5 growing children, who ranged in age from 7 to 16.
Nathan Allen was well liked. He was a hard-working man. He worked, and when he wasn't working, he was taking care of his children.
He was dedicated to raising us kids. Taking care of 5 kids was a job, and that's all he did was work and take care of us.
Around 11 p.m. on May 10, 1979, Nathan Allen and a friend had just finished work and were heading home. When Nathan got into his truck and started it, there was an explosion. Nathan was blown through the windshield.
He didn't die right away. He lived for a period of time, and what the doctors called was excruciating pain. They couldn't even describe it to us.
Maybe we were hoping it was a mistake, but it wasn't, and we were just devastated. We didn't know what we were going to do. It was really rough.
Nathan Allen died, but miraculously the passenger, Robert Riffey, was not badly hurt.
Robert Riffey received minor injuries, hearing loss, and some other minor injuries, but he survived.
When questioned, Riffey was able to provide some important information. He said the explosion didn't happen until after Nathan started the truck. At first, investigators suspected that a gasoline leak might have caused the explosion, but that was eliminated fairly quickly.
We could see that the crater was actually blown in towards the gas tank, not out from the gas tank. So we knew that the gas tank didn't have anything to do with the explosion.
Investigators performed a grid search, examining every inch of the parking lot, and found a key piece of evidence.
In one of the squares, I located what was the end cap, a small plastic rubber type material that is the end cap to an electric blasting cap.
A blasting cap is a device used to detonate explosives.
That find is quite unique. Usually you do not find the end of the blasting cap because it's inserted into the explosives and usually is completely destroyed.
And they also found small pieces of blue and yellow plastic-coated wire.
And those are the colors and the type that are used in the electric blasting caps, used in the initiation for commercial type explosives or even military type explosives.
The detonation wires were attached to the truck's electrical system, specifically the secondary lights, meaning the bomb exploded when the driver hit the brake lights or used the turn signal.
When you look at a bomb, the first thing that you need to be able to do, at least in the first 72 hours, is you need to be able to identify the type of device that was used, how it was initiated, and what that does is it establishes a window of time during which the device may have been placed.
Nathan's truck had been in the parking lot from 3 p.m. until the explosion around 11 p.m. This proved that someone tampered with the truck's wiring while it sat in the parking lot.
It became significant. Obviously, he didn't drive there without using the brakes, so it let us know that the device had to have been connected in the parking lot.
The bomber does not have to be around and watch his victim. It's not what we call a command detonation. There's no wire leading somewhere and he has a big plunger to make the thing go off. The bomb is a self-contained unit because it uses the automobile's own power to set the explosive off. So the bomber could watch if he wants, or he could be 1,000 miles away. It doesn't make any difference.
But investigators had no obvious suspects, which meant that if the bomber decided to strike again, they'd have no way to stop him. Investigators believe the explosion that killed Nathan Allen was a commercial explosive, the type used by experts.
The intricacy of the device would be the understanding that the bomber needed to have of the electrical wiring system of the vehicle, so as to preclude himself from being blown up when he connected the wires to the electrical system. It would have required more than just grassroots knowledge.
And they had to consider whether tensions between steel workers and company management had finally turned deadly.
No one knew why anyone wanted to kill Nate Allen. And so the agents began looking at possible reasons why. One was Nate Allen had been involved in some union activity.
The first things we kick around on almost any of the cases were, was it somebody they knew, or was it somebody they worked with? Who did they have an argument with? Or, you know, who would want to do something like this to them, you know?
But according to co-workers, Nathan Allen and his passenger Robert Riffey were both popular and friendly with fellow workers and management.
It didn't appear that any of them had any obvious enemies. Nothing jumped out and said, "Here I am."
The bomb had been placed directly under the driver's seat, which indicated that the truck's owner, Nathan Allen, was the intended victim. Police asked Allen's family if anyone in Nathan's personal life may have wanted to harm him. Nathan's estranged wife was in a psychiatric hospital hundreds of miles away when the bombing occurred and was not considered a suspect.
My parents were separated and divorced, and we all wanted to live with our father, so we did, because my mom was always kind of sick, but if she didn't take her medicine, she wasn't doing real well.
Nathan's aunt, Sandra Sue McFillin, took care of Nathan's children while he was at work. She and her husband, Pete, insisted he had no known enemies.
Inspector Clouseau had a saying, "We suspect everyone, we suspect no one." Basically, you need to come into an investigation like this with no predisposition. If you come in with a predisposition, you have a tendency to follow avenues that may not be the right avenues.
Investigators knew that someone had armed the bomb while Nathan's car was parked at work. Unfortunately, the parking lot was open to anyone, not just employees, and there was no video surveillance. With no suspects and no apparent motive, investigators hoped debris at the bomb site would help identify the killer.
One way of solving a bombing, and I believe it's the best way, is trace the evidence. Find something that's unique and trace it back to the actual bomb scene, or trace it back to the suspect.
There were thousands of pieces of potential evidence in the bomb debris. Foam padding and other materials from the truck needed to be separated from potential evidence, and for that, investigators used a black light.
There was material that was standing out pretty strongly, and I was able to recover them, and they clearly were not pieces of fabric or other material.
Peimer saw thousands of granules, each the size of a grain of sand, that looked as if they were made of plastic. Under a microscope, each one had 6 layers, each layer a different color: white, blue, white, purple, yellow, and red.
I was absolutely stunned. When I found them, I didn't believe it at first. I went away, I got some coffee, I came back and I looked at them again.
And then he remembered.
Once I looked at them, there was nothing else it could possibly be.
It was a discovery that would make scientific history. Investigators found thousands of multicolored plastic fragments, each the size of a grain of sand, in the bomb debris that killed Nathan Allen. At first they were baffled, but then they remembered. These fragments were tagans. They were put into explosives as an experiment by the ATF, as an aid to investigators.
It was a microscopic chip that they placed inside of the explosives themselves. They're microscopic, but they are color-coded.
At the time, only 1% of all explosives had them.
In addition to having the colors, the chips also had a fluorescent layer on one side and a magnetic layer on the other.
Peimer called the ATF, gave them the color sequence, and he was given the corresponding date shift code.
It's like finding the explosives unexploded and finding the date shift code on the explosive and being able to trace them out. And once you can do that, you can go through the records and see who bought it, or who stored it, or who stole it, or whatever it happens to be.
The order of the colors indicated the code was 8DEO2A146. These meant that the explosives were made by the DuPont Company and were a brand called Tovex 220. The code number also identified the plant, the date, the time it was manufactured, and the lot number. In other words, investigators could trace the explosive from the plant to the store which sold it. This lot of explosives were sent to a dealer in West Virginia, which sold them out of his garage. The dealer provided a list of every customer who had purchased Tovex 220 explosives from this lot.
Back then, essentially what you needed was a driver's license or some form of identification to be able to fill out the ATF explosive form. Today it's a lot different.
There were 15 people on the list, and investigators recognized one of them. It was Pete McFillin, Nathan Allen's uncle, whose wife babysat for Nathan's children.
The tag-ins were the first really big break with the date shift code. Subsequently, seeing a McFillin name attached to the purchase of the explosives was absolutely significant. It was jubilation. It was like scoring a touchdown and spiking the ball in the end zone.
Family members couldn't believe it.
My dad and my Uncle Pete, they grew up together and they were close their whole lives. They were more like brothers, probably, did anything.
Sometimes he called himself Pete the Bad Man. So, you know, he wanted to be a tough guy. I don't know how tough he was.
When questioned, McFillin said he bought the explosives to remove some tree stumps on a piece of land he owned, and he said he still had them in his garage.
Pete McFillin said, "I found my explosives, I have them right here." We went. Interestingly enough, the Tovex that he had was Tovex 210, an entirely different product.
Pete McFillin wasn't able to produce the Tovex 220, which he purchased in West Virginia. And investigators discovered McFillin was an automobile mechanic who regularly serviced Nathan's truck.
My father was a real good mechanic. He could fix about anything. And I was told about a week before the explosion happened that Nathan was having a problem with these brake lights, and he'd asked my father to fix them. And my father rewired the brake lights or whatever he did to the vehicle.
In a toolbox in McFillin's car, investigators found some blue and yellow wires. Forensic analysts used infrared spectrography to analyze the chemical components of the wires.
A beam of infrared light is passed through the material. The material that you're testing either absorbs or reflects the light. And as it absorbs or reflects the light, the graph goes up and down. And this produces a tracing.
The results indicated that the plastic used to make the wires found in Pete McFillin's toolbox was identical to the plastic in the wires found at the bomb scene.
Another piece of evidence that was found during the search warrant was a notebook which contained information that showed the shifts and the times that the victim worked. This information was examined forensically, and an association was made between the handwriting in the notebook and the handwriting of the suspect.
Pete McFillan was arrested and charged with his nephew's murder. All investigators needed now was the motive. Investigators, family, and friends all wanted to know why Pete McFillan would murder his nephew, Nathan Allen. Family members provided a possible explanation. They said that Nathan Allen and Pete McFillan's wife, Sandra Sue, used to date when they were teenagers.
I imagine in around 1955, Nathan and Sue kind of hit it off, and they were boyfriend and girlfriend. I don't think there was any reason for my father to be jealous, but there was probably always that in the back of his mind that something could happen.
25 years later, Nathan was a single father, and Sandra Sue babysat his children when he was at work.
Pete McFillan felt that Sandra Sue was spending entirely too much time with the Allens, and particularly with Nathan Allen. And he felt that she was not spending enough time with him and not fulfilling her responsibilities as a wife to him, and felt that Nathan Allen was the person responsible for this.
My father would just say, Pete, come on now, you know better, but that would be the end of that, and they would just leave, well enough alone and go on.
He had the potential to do something drastic. I would think from his previous experiences with my mother, he was, I think he was pretty jealous of my mother, and I know he had threatened her a lot of times, threatened to kill her.
Everybody knew that she did not have this affair with him. The only person that knew that there was one was my father, Pete McFillan. He had an affair in his own mind because he was crazy. He was just a son of a bitch. That's all there was to it. He was a crazy son of a bitch. It was never an affair.
Prosecutors believe jealousy got the best of Pete McFillan, who set out to kill his nephew, Nathan Allen. And he had the skills to do it. When Nathan asked his uncle to fix the lights in his truck, Pete seized the opportunity. He made a bomb using the explosives he purchased in West Virginia and attached it to the underside of Nathan's truck, directly beneath the driver's seat. he mistakenly left some of the excess wiring in his tool chest. On the day of the murder, Pete drove into the Bethlehem Steel parking lot and wired the bomb to the truck's secondary lighting system. McFillan knew Nathan's schedule, which was found in his garage. But he had no way of knowing that Nathan had offered his friend Robert Riffey a ride home that night. Most of the evidence went up in smoke, except for the microscopic taggants put into the explosives which tied Pete McFillan directly to its purchase. Pete McFillan was tried and convicted of murder and was sentenced to life in prison.
Even though we could prove that Pete McFillan might have a motive to kill Nate Allen because of his jealousy, motive doesn't take you to guilt. The only thing I believe that took us to guilt in this case was the forensic evidence.
Especially the taggants was made the investigation a lot easier. I don't think we could have solved it, and I don't believe we would have got a conviction without the taggant evidence that we had.
In a lot of instances, in explosive cases, you could say to yourself, I know that he's the bomber, but you cannot put him forensically with the bomb. The taggants allowed us to forensically attach the suspect to the bomb.
Pete McFillan was the only person in the United States to be convicted with taggant evidence. The ATF abandoned its taggant program in 1979 because of the costs involved, as well as political concerns.
The explosive taggant program should have continued. It provides a lot of information for investigators. It acts as a deterrent to bombers. There are a lot of reasons to tag, and the number one reason is you solve cases.
Today, Switzerland is the only country with a mandatory taggant program.